So in the previous episode of Easements Act series, we have covered up to chapter 4 and section 36. In this video, we'll start with chapter 5 of the Easements Act. This chapter is about extinction, suspension and revival of easement. Today in our platter, we have section 37, 38, 39, 40 and 41. Each of them have been timestamped in the description below, so you can go to any part of your liking by just clicking the chapter specification above the progress bar in your video. Now all that being said, let's straight jump into the video. Hey guys, my name is Akash. I'm a 4th year law student in South Calcutta Law College and you are watching Lawve. Okay, so before starting off with the sections, let's make sure that you know what extinction of easement means. Extinction of easement means ending of an easement. When and how an easement right extincts, or when and how an easement right comes to an end, is the subject matter of discussion of the first part of this chapter. So from here on, we'll discuss how and when an easement right comes to an end in this particular video. Alright, so section 37. Section 37 talks about extinction of easement right by dissolution of right of the servient owner. So when the right of the servient owner over the servient heritage ceases to exist because of a cause which precedes the time period of imposition of the easement right, any easement right that has been imposed on that particular property by that servient owner will also cease to exist or will extinct. But there is one exception as to when a property is sold as a part of a mortgage debt and the easement right was imposed by the mortgager as per the provisions of section 10. In that particular case, the easement right will not extend. So the essential factor for extinction of easement in this particular way is that the reason for which the servant owner ceases to have his right on the servant heritage must precede, it must exist before the time period when the easement right was imposed by him on that property. Okay, let's see some examples. So we'll see two examples, one for the rule and one for the exception. So let's say A gives the property to B in lease for 30 years. Now, after 1 year of granting the lease, B imposes an easement right on that property in favor of C. Now, C uses that easement right for 29 years straight without any interruption. And then the right of B on that property ceases to exist as per the lease between A and B. And with that, the easement right imposed in favor of C will also cease to exist. Because the reason for which B's right now ceases to exist on that property was the lease contract between A and B saying that the lease rights will come to an end after a period of 30 years, which was done before the period when B imposed the easement right on that property in favor of C. Now suppose in another scenario, A mortgages the property to B, and then after mortgaging he imposes an easement right on that property in favor of C. Now this particular property is sold to D as part of the mortgage debt. Now if the rules of this section has to be followed, the easement right imposed in favor of C should come to an end. But according to the exception, which says that in case of a mortgage property is sold as a part of a mortgage debt, the easement right imposed by the mortgager as per the provisions of section 10 will not cease to exist, will not extinct when the property is sold, when the right of the mortgager on that property ceases to exist. So in this particular example, even though the right of A, the mortgager, the person who imposed that easement, ceases to exist on that property, the easement right which was imposed by him, the easement right which was imposed by the previous servient owner, A, the mortgager, will not extinct and C will continue to enjoy the easement right in his favor imposed on that property. Alright, so section 38. It talks about extinction of easement by release of it by the dominant owner. To put it bluntly, if the dominant owner expressly or impliedly gives up the easement right extincts. That part is simple. But this section also mentions that the easement right can only be given up in circumstances and to the extent in and to which the dominant owner can alienate the property. Now, what does that mean? It basically means that if you are not the effective dominant owner, you cannot give up the easement right. So for example, let's say A has an easement right over B's property for the beneficial enjoyment of his own property, right? Now, A gives this property in lease to C. Now, during the continuance of the lease period, C is the effective dominant owner and not A. So understand that during the continuance of this period, the lease period, A cannot give up the easement right because A is not the effective dominant owner in this period. C is. So according to this section, A cannot give up the easement right in that period, in that lease period. But interestingly, neither can C. C also cannot give up the easement right because A has a right to get back the easement right by means of reversion once the period of lease is over. So C can give up the right, but he has to take consent of A. Without that, C also cannot give up the right, and A cannot give up the right by provision of this particular section. The fact that C cannot give up the right is not the subject matter of this section. He cannot give up the right because of the reversion rule that A is entitled to get back the easement right after the lease period is over. Okay, so moving on to section 39. Oh, no, not section 39. That just came out in flow. This is a huge ass section. Section 38 also says that the easement right can be given up in respect to just a part of the servient heritage as well. So if I have an easement right of way over your property and I say that, either expressly or impliedly, I say that from now on, I won't be using the whole property for my easement right of way. I will use this particular specific path through your property for my right of way. Then I have given up the easement right in respect to a part of the property, but not the whole property. This section says that this can be done as well. Now moving on to the explanation. Huge ass section. There are two explanations in this section. Explanation 1 talks about what can be considered as implied giving up of easement right. Now there are two very specific scenarios that are mentioned here. Scenario 1 says that for the dominant owner expressly authorizes an act of a permanent nature to be done on the servient heritage, the necessary consequence of which is to prevent his future enjoyment of the easement, and such an act is done in pursuance of such authority, the easement right will be considered to be given up. So if I have an easement right of way over your land again, and I expressly allow you to build a wall on that land in a way that it will be impossible for me to use that piece of land for my easement right of way in the future, and I know that, and I allow you to build that particular wall on that property, then it will impliedly suggest that I want to, or I have given up the easement right of way over your property. The second scenario is that when a permanent alteration is made in the dominant heritage of such a nature as to show that the dominant owner intended to seize the enjoyment of the easement right in future. In that case, the easement right will be believed to have released impliedly. Now, suppose I had an easement right of receiving light to my window, free passage of light to my window over your land, and I shut that window down by brick and mortar. Now, this will manifest an intention of giving up that easement right of receiving light to my window, right? I am sealing that window with brick and mortar. Obviously, I don't want light through that window. Either I am redecorating my house or I have gone mad. Anyway, so in that particular case, when the dominant owner shows a clear intention that he does not want to receive the easement right anymore, which is in this particular case, I am showing a clear intention that I don't want to receive light through that window anymore, the easement right will be considered to have been given up impliedly. Now, in general, the question that whether there was an intention on the part of the dominant owner to release the easement right, this has to be decided on the facts and circumstances of any particular case. There cannot be any hard and fast rule. This has to be decided varying from case to case. The question that is needed to be answered by the courts is whether by the acts of the dominant owner, any common man, a man of common prudence, a man of common intelligence can draw a inference that he wanted to give up that right. There is another explanation in this section, section 38, which says, the explanation 2, which says that a mere non-use of an easement right does not mean there is an implied intention of giving up that right. So if a dominant owner is not using an easement right vested on him, it does not necessarily mean that he wants to give up that right. You cannot draw an inference from the mere fact that he was not using that easement right. You cannot draw an inference that he wanted to give up that right. And this conclusion has been held by many courts in many cases of this particular nature that has been pushed in front of those particular courts. So section 39, finally. It is possible that a servient owner imposes an easement right on his property but reserves the right to revoke that easement right whenever he wants. For example, suppose you let me use your passageway to get into my house as an easement right of way, but you reserve the right to revoke that easement right from me whenever the hell you want. Now, such an easement right will extinct when you choose to revoke it. The main thing to understand here is that if you want to extinct the easement in this manner, then you should reserve the right of revocation from the very beginning, and you must let this dominant owner know that such a clause exists in this particular easement right. And this kind of revocation, as you can understand, is not applicable in case of easement of necessity or even easement of prescription for that matter. Section 40. So section 40 talks about extinction by expiration of a limited period or on the happening of a dissolving condition. You remember section 6, right? Easement right for a limited period or on condition. The happenings of section 40 are the effects of the causes stated in section 6. So when an easement right is imposed for a limited period of time or its existence is made contingent on a condition, that is, when that condition happens, the easement right will come to an end. Such easement right will extinct or will come to an end at the end of the limited period or on happening of the condition on which it was made contingent. Now, I'll not go very deep in this topic because this has already been discussed in this video. So if you want to know more about easements for a limited period or on condition, just watch that video. I have in that particular video I have mentioned some examples, and like everything you want to know about easements for a limited period or on condition is in that video. And the effects of that is section 40, that when that period ends, when the contingent condition happens, the easement right just ends, the easement right just extends. 41. Extinction on termination of necessity. So, in a case of a necessary easement, again, if you want to know more about necessary easement, this is the video you should watch. But yeah, in case of a necessary easement, the easement right extincts when the necessity extincts. The easement right ceases to exist when the necessity ceases to exist. So there was a case called Rupabai versus Ratanlal. In that case, the court held that the easement of necessity cannot last longer than the necessity itself. An easement of necessity is imposed when, without that easement, the dominant header cannot be enjoyed beneficially. So when that necessity ends, the easement right cannot last any longer than that. And so in this particular case, the dominant owner who had an easement right of using the latrine of the servient owner, latrine on the property of the servient owner, ceased to have his easement right when he constructed a latrine in his own land. Alright, so that's it for this video, ending it with the poop reference. Anyways, so like this video if you like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you think all the other videos of the channel are worthy of it. And the whole Easements Act series is linked right up here, so go to any part we have completed from section 1 to section 4 because section 1, 2, 3 are just extent of the act and all that stuff. From section 4 to now section 41 we have covered. In the next video we'll start with section 42 and then we'll see how much far we can go. So follow me on the various social media accounts to connect with me and my journey, and always remember that all our dreams come true when we have the courage to pursue it. You have a very good day, you have a very good life. Goodbye. We'll see you in the next one.